Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the November Residency Liaison meeting. Thank you for joining us. And one last time, thank you for muting your microphones and your telephones. And if you're on the telephone, please don't put us on hold. As we go through today, please feel free to put any questions that you may have in the chat box, and we'll follow those along and try to answer your questions as they come up. We are recording the session, just to let everybody know, and we also will provide the link to the recording along with the slides once those are published and become available. Thank you for joining us today, and we only have a few slides. I don't think we will be here very long today. However, if you do have questions, we want to make sure that we're providing those questions to everybody and that people have an opportunity to ask those questions so that way we can answer them. So at this time, we'll go ahead and move forward with our presentation today. To begin with, we had a question left over from last meeting, and that question was about military IDs and whether they could be copied or not. Now, we did have a good discussion about whether you even needed those military IDs and received some good guidance from Jean about that. However, we did want to answer the follow-up question about whether it was permissible to copy those military IDs and documents. We did work with General Counsel Tawanda Foster Artis, and she says basically that you do have permission for residency purposes and for any other documentation of military-related benefits. So that is permissible, and we do appreciate Tawanda giving us an answer on that and helping us research it and come up with some guidance for everybody. I doubt if we'll have any follow-up questions to that, so I'm just going to go ahead and keep moving forward through the slide deck. So our next topic, we didn't receive any other questions via the link. So at this time, we'll turn it over to Tracy if she's on the line and see if she has some updates for us. Tracy, were you able to make it this morning?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good morning.
Good morning. What do you have for us today?
Not a whole lot. The general updates of things that we've done. We haven't done a lot of releases to the website that are public. I'm not sure that I mentioned this on our last call, but one thing we did do is implement the re-entry of the SSN when a person starts an interview, to compare it to the SSN on the student's profile, because we have, a large number of our calls we get are login related issues and issues related to incorrect social security numbers and things like that. So that's one thing that we just keep on working on, adding things to help that get better. That's really the only thing external that we've done as far as releases. We've done quite a few internal things to help us keep the work going smoothly. Onto the statistics that was attached to the agenda. I see you got that sent out to everyone. The trend continues to hold with the overall volume, total number of students using RDS trending down year over year. And, there's a number of reasons for that. I've been over them before. We've had the COVID, which you can, throws uncertainty into everything. We have the clearinghouse where we're doing, extending expiration dates so people don't have to redo RDS and things like that. Overall, down about 5%. And then you can just see the age percentage changes. They were up for the younger, 17 and younger, down for 18 to 23, and down for 24 to 35, and up for older. So I don't know what it all means. The number of calls that we received in the first quarter was down 21%, which we consider that a very good thing, because that means more people are able to help themselves. And we owe a lot of that to some of the things we have done around the login issues. So that's basically it. Not a whole lot new to see on the statistics. I did want to mention that we are requesting the fall enrollment file. In the very beginning of December, we'll be requesting that file to process from the clearinghouse and extend enrollment dates out as per the processing of the clearinghouse enrollment file. The other thing I wanted to mention was we did have college application week before last, and I do have some numbers that were hot off the press, so I can send those to you if you want, and you can distribute them. The college application week statistics that I have are comparing this year's college application week to 2019 college application week, and not 2020 because we had a 2-week college application week last year. So we just went ahead and skipped last year and compared to 2019. The average age of our people coming through was a slight decrease of 1.45%. Notably, 18 to 23 was the only age group that increased as far as the number of percent of people that came through RDS during college application week. It looks like the 17 and youngers might be doing their RDS sooner and not doing it during college application week because they're doing it at high school. Overall, from last year or the year before last, the number of initial classifications was down significantly, 48%. So the college application week generally was down for the number of students coming through RDS, and the call center volume was down as well. One thing to point out is, as I kind of mentioned, the students seem like they're doing, a lot of students are doing RDS before college application week because the high school, the counselors have gotten really more involved in getting their students to do RDS along with the Finish the FAFSA project. So if you look at the number of requests for college application week 2019 to 2021, they're down 11.5%. But then if you just compare August 1 to college application week for the same 2 periods, it's down 0.5%. So it does look like it's spread out a little bit more and it's less concentrated during the college application week. So I can say all that'll be easier if you can see it. So after the meeting, I will send this to you, JW, and if you would like, you can send it out. Overall, college application, consider it
I'm sorry there, Tracy. I think I cut you off and then you started breaking up. My apologies. What was your last comments there?
I just said overall we considered the college application week successful. We didn't have any technical issues or any problems, and everything ran smoothly. So that's basically my update. And if you want to send, I'll send these to you after, and if you like, you can distribute them.
Yeah, that would be great, and I think the audience would definitely like to have those documents in their files for both these. If you could send me the quarterly statistics as well, that'll just make it easier for me to be able to get that forwarded out to everybody.
Yeah, you already sent those with the agenda.
Yeah, and so we can get those, both the quarterly statistics sent out to everybody along with the slides and the link to the recording, as well as the college application statistics too.
Okay.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that. And we did have one question in the chat box. I don't know for sure if you're the right person or if Jean is the person to answer this question. And we've had this question come up before, but I think it's a good question because we have a lot of new people, and also it's good to be reminded. And basically the question is, what should a college do if they become aware that a student has changed their address and they've moved? Maybe they moved in-state. That would be one part of the question. Is there any action that the college should take? And then the follow-up question is, what if the student moved out of state? And then that gets into the grace period and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So could the two of you provide some guidance about what the obligation of the college is and how they should guide the student whenever a student moves as they are still a current student?
G, do you want to answer or do you want me to? And then you can tell me if I leave anything out.
Yeah, go ahead, start. Yeah.
Well, if the student moves out of state, we do ask to be notified. And as you said, we'll flip that in RDS and make a note. That'll trigger the grace period to start. That's because we don't want others to possibly pull that decision in. That's the short answer on that. You can call the RDS school line and convey that information. If a student moves in state and they're currently out of state, I mean, I guess you would have them do RDS, but as you know, you have to be here for a year to become a resident. That's the short answer. Gene, what else have you got to add?
Yeah, I think it's situation dependent, because if the student was younger and not, when they came through RDS, they were seen as dependent on the parents, you become aware that the family as a whole has moved. If the student's staying behind, there's always the possibility that RDS can review it to see if they now qualify to be independent. But yes, it's important to let RDS know, because there's several things that if you become aware the student has told a college that there's a change of permanent address. If it's temporary, that's another question, but we'll sort it out. But for the permanent changes, it's important RDS is aware and codes this so that a student doesn't have continued access to state grants. There's a different set of eligibility for that. They must be residing in North Carolina. However, that's where the grace period can go into effect. If they're enrolled, it's 12 months from the date of the change. You could continue to allow them to be billed as in state. My best suggestion is, and then there's another provision if they move and then move back. My best suggestion is, if you have students like that, contact the RDS school line and let's look at them one by one about the best course of action in those cases.
Yeah.
You're muted.
We can't hear you, JW.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you guys for answering that question for us. And I did put the RDS staff call center information there. We appreciate RDS implementing that for us a few years ago to where there's a campus support line. Just a reminder not to share that with students. That way we have a nice solid hotline straight to the campus or straight to RDS whenever we have those questions and that students in front of us and we need somebody to dialogue with, like on these types of topics. So thank you, Gene. Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate it. And I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So we'll go ahead and move, Gene, to your updates.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, this is going to be brief. Let me piggyback on one comment that Tracy made about the college application. I will say that it's kind of a team effort of a lot of us trying to do some presentations, not only for school staff, college, university staff, but high school counselors in particular. And I've been trying to pass on, here are the common stumbling blocks that students come across, with RDS and suggestions. And so I have been encouraging them to do that early. So that's probably part of the shift, that in mentality over the years, this used to be kind of a 1 week kind of thing, and now it's more an extended period. So I think some of those are coming in earlier when we look at the overall numbers, which I think is a good thing. It spreads them out. In terms of what I submitted there, just a quick report. So far this term, and this is the busiest quarter for us in terms of SEA appeals, we heard 9. They were all sustained. I will just comment that none of them were students who were seeking to attend a community college. They were all students enrolled in a university. They came here from out of state, they got out of state, and to their mind, after 12 months, they should automatically be residents. So that's what we face this time of year frequently, but none of them showed signs that it was a permanent change. In terms of legislative update, we still have 2 items of interest. It wouldn't be a central change to residency criteria, but they're in the budget bills if we ever get them through and passed, and we'll see what happens. But one's for a potential additional tuition waiver for graduates of the School of Science and Math, and one is a University of North Carolina system specific for athletic scholarships. So if all that comes to fruition, it's in 2 different versions and it goes through, we'll notify you of any changes, especially that fee waiver that you might use. We sent out a memo clarifying some guidance about the veterans exceptions, about what chapters of financial aid awards were eligible. Unfortunately, we were given some guidance that turned out to not be applicable in North Carolina. The VA person somehow mixed it up with another state where they had a state law about requiring Chapter 35. So there's guidance that went out. It's 30, 31, 33. If they have those awards, they must be adjusted for every semester awarded to in-state. If you have questions, let us know. Interestingly, that same issue is back on the table, and there is at the federal level pending legislation to extend it to Chapter 35. It seems like every year there's a small change in these for the Veterans Awards. Rest assured, I'm keeping an eye on that. If there's any changes, we'll let you know. And finally, I just wanted to comment about, now that we've sent out and hopefully people have had time to look at the new guidebook and especially the campus responsibility guide, I'm hoping that these are more helpful, user-friendly, and expanded them with more information in them. If we have any legislative changes, I'll be doing revisions to both of those edits to add the new information. So if you have any suggestions or feedback, let me know, or any additional tools that you thought would be helpful. I'm trying to put as much in your hands that would apply to anything campus related, something very practical. So if I've omitted something or something else would be helpful or need for further clarification, let me know. Okay, and JW, that's it for me.
All right. Thank you, Gene. I appreciate that. Amelia, we'll try to answer your question that you put in the chat box, I think, here in a couple of slides. If we don't get that answered, please speak up. Are there any other questions for Gene and what he shared with us, or any other type of questions for the group?
JW, this is Michelle Dupuis from Coastal. I have a quick question.
Hey, Michelle, what you got?
So I just want clarification with the campus responsibility manual. That is for exceptions that the college itself applies, usually via student types, to change the tuition charge, mostly from out to in. RDS will send us some exceptions, especially like military dependent, active duty military. But I get very confused as to what it is our responsibility when RDS is sending us those exceptions. Are we still responsible for maintaining all of that information after RDS has requested it, or are we just responsible if changes occur?
I think that is a great question, Michelle, and we'll let Gene answer that here in a second. I just want to repeat it back to make sure we understand. And basically the question is when you receive an exception code via RDS, and it's one of those like the military that they have already collected the documentation, is the college responsible for collecting documentation as well? And if they're not initially, are they at some point in the future required to collect some documentation? Is that correct, Michelle?
Yes, that's it. And since RDS does not provide us with expirations for these exceptions, how do we handle that? Or do we just wait until their program changes or they graduate or whatever that the continuous enrollment changes?
Gotcha. Okay. So that was a loaded question with several questions embedded in it. However, I think Jean can answer those. I think you got that, Jean. Or so I'll
Yes.
turn the mic over to Jean, and we'll see if if this helps.
Okay. I know this is really confusing. I think the best way I can explain it is um, there are a couple of exceptions that RDS handles up front, and they are military. When you see that out in, okay, active duty military stationed in North Carolina, but they're claiming another state as their permanent residence, or a small number of North Carolina National Guard who live in another state, but they're affiliated here. They're non-residents, but those exceptions in law don't require other criteria. Like the veterans exception requires they have to have awarded and use each term a benefit. So that's something, or like the UNC employee exception, or someone saying my employer is going to pay this. RDS has no way of verifying that. Because there's no other criteria for these exceptions, that's where RDS gives that out in. So Michelle, in those cases, the only reason it's passed on is letting you know that, first of all, it's coding the basis of why they're getting in state, but it's also that there's a long-term tracking for eligibility. That is, and essentially, as long as they start classes, you know, with that determination, they can keep it as long as they're continuously enrolled in that program. So so let's say the service member gets transferred out of state, but the family stays behind. They can keep that determination as long as they're continuously enrolled in the same program. So it's really just a flag for those purposes. Very rarely are you going to see military orders with a fixed date saying this is when this ends. It's usually open-ended. There are someone coming close to retirement, in which case RDS would put that in there, that they've got to enroll by that date. So if we got a set of orders saying this service member is being discharged January 1st, that would be passed on. But that's very, very rare. North Carolina National Guard, again, you only have to look at the ones that get that out in because they're living in another state, but they're affiliated here. Those are long-term contracts, and we would pass on the date. So I hope that helps. So in those cases, you're really just monitoring long-term that there hasn't been a break in enrollment or that they didn't graduate and they're seeking to re-enroll. Because they would, as long as they enrolled, they'd be okay. It's the ones where you're giving a campus exception. They got out from RDS. Those are cases where campuses need to document. Does that help?
It does, but it's not the same. So the experiences that we have with our military, we over a third of our population have military affiliation, and at times it's half or more. And we have a lot that what we use is their EAS dates because many of them don't re-enlist. They get out after 4 to 6 years. And while yes, they can maintain that enrollment, or at least the military member could potentially maintain that enrollment for the life of the program, that's conflicting information with the dependent who's, you know, sponsored gets out and they just get out. It doesn't matter if they maintain continuous enrollment in the program. The information says that they are now out of state. And unless they switch to using some sort of veteran benefit that's qualified under the in-state qualified veterans area, then we have to put them out. That's where I guess we end up keeping documentation on all of our students, regardless of whether RDS identifies them as out in or out, because we do have so many that change while they're here, and it doesn't match what the residency regulations say.
Okay, I guess I'm not 100% clear then, because as I understand the law, that for the active duty stationed in North Carolina, once the student has out in, as long as they enroll with it, they can keep that determination as long as they're continuously enrolled, even if, let's say, that service member gets transferred or leaves. they're allowed to keep it for the duration of their program.
And
I see that in active duty military, but I don't see that in the dependents.
I will tell you what, let me do a careful review of the language again legally, but I believe that's the guidance we were given, is that once someone enrolls under that provision, I would think they'd be okay, but let me do some research and we'll get back on that about the dependents. I don't think there's a problem. At least that's always been what I've led to believe. So,
Okay.
but they have to have enrolled. On the first day they enrolled, they must have been eligible for that out-in.
Okay.
Okay, but then when the service, so if the service member gets transferred the next day, they're okay, you know, but they have to stay continuously enrolled in the same program.
Okay, because what it says, I guess what I'm looking at is a dependent relative of an honorably discharged service member must establish legal residence within 30 days after discharge, remain continuously enrolled in the degree, and remain a dependent of the service member who's honorably discharged. So all three things have to apply. It's not just continuous enrollment.
Again, my understanding, let me do some research and I'll get legal guidance again, but my understanding is that would be the case if the service member then is looking to, there is a provision, if someone is active duty military stationed in North Carolina, they're discharged, but they want to change their permanent residence to North Carolina. There is a 30-day period there where if they do that, they would not have to meet the duration requirements.
Right.
Okay, so, and then that would apply to the family as well.
Right. That's only if they choose to change their residency to North Carolina. Many
Correct.
of our military who get out don't choose to do that. They would like to remain a resident of their state. They do have their family members still attending here. And I guess I get very confused because it does have, all those stipulations have to be met in order for them to maintain their in-state tuition charge. So yeah, whenever you get some research, that would be great.
Yeah, let me go review, because we've got several scenarios here of, now in that case, if the service member had not been enrolled, they're discharged from the military and now they want to enroll, they wouldn't be eligible for the out-in anymore.
Right, but they could use their
Veterans benefit, sure, of
Right.
course. But my understanding is the spouse or dependents, if they had been enrolled, they could keep that as long as they're continuous enrolled. It's just any new enrollments would not be eligible to go back to that. But let me think through all the different scenarios, review all that, and if necessary, I'll get legal consultation again.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Michelle, for bringing that up, because we have several questions with both veterans and with the military here in the chat box. And so what I'm thinking is maybe we dedicate some time for our December meeting, everyone, to where we will just, we'll dedicate some time where we discuss all the military and veteran kind of scenarios and options that you might run into. We'll provide also some documentation, Gene, you know, so that way we're pointing to the right references for people in the guidebook and in the law. We can also look at the veterans. We have one question here about the student types with veterans. We can provide those. I don't know those right off the top of my head, Crystal, what the student types are for veterans that you use. It is in the student type guide. Unless somebody on the call has that information readily available, I don't at this point. So I'll pause here to see if anybody does.
We use ISQV if they're the in-state qualified veteran, if they qualify for those veteran statuses.
That's it. I couldn't remember what that was. Thank you, Michelle. It's hard to believe that I haven't logged into Colleague in probably like 11 years. So it takes time for me to remember those kind of things. And then Jeremy highlights that sometimes there's difficulty when people change programs and keeping tracking of all of that. And when they graduate and then move to another program, we hear you, Jeremy, that can be challenging, and hopefully we can bring some clarification to you for you on that topic next month. In our last meeting, this is from Judy. Last meeting, I had a question about B1 visa students and if they are able to attend school. Is there any update on this? That is something that we're still researching, to be honest about it. Monty, Jean, and I have been working on that. It's an interesting situation, Judy, in that some of the documentation on Homeland Security and other places online indicates that temporary B visas are not eligible for college credit. Others, so it's a little, there seems to be some complexity there, of course, nothing's ever simple. And so we're planning to bring this up at the next HECAC meeting, which is the governance meeting. We have that on our agenda to discuss that and to get some very clear guidance on what we think they should do. So Judy, I'm sorry that we're delaying that yet another month. However, we really need this to be a group decision from the governance body about the B visas. I apologize for that. Thank you for your patience. Thank you everybody for putting ISQV in there. I appreciate that and keeping me on track. Michelle, thank you for bringing up that question. It's definitely and obviously a hot topic that we need to discuss. And so thank you for bringing that to our attention. Are there any other questions for Jean? All right, Jean, I guess we'll have to put down in our notes to make sure, one, we talk about the B visas at HECAC, and two, that we kind of have a time dedicated to deal with the military and the veterans in our next call.
Okay, will do.
All right, thank you, Jean. I appreciate you, man. So friends, we'll go ahead and move forward. We have a couple of system office updates, and I have to be honest, this is the one that I am excited about, and we have kind of been working on now for about 4 years. One of the things when RDS first came out, and a concern that I think was a legitimate concern from the campuses and from the colleges, was that there are times where you have that student in front of you that is actually even your neighbor, and you know them, and for whatever reason, they're not able to answer the questions in the RDS interview in such a way that they're able to get a residency determination of in-state. And there are also times where that person just because of their life situation, they just can't get the information that is needed. And so the college needs the ability to have a little more time to help work with that student, because classes in a lot of those situations happen tomorrow or next week, and there's just not enough time to get everything together and to remedy and mitigate the situation for that student. So the first step that we took in this process was with a lot of research in partnership with RDS and SEAA, we were able to change the law a couple of years ago, you may remember, to where the high school graduation, North Carolina high school graduation, was weighted a little higher, and it was actually in the law now to give SEAA some authority to consider high school graduation as a significant event in the decision-making of residency determination. Well, this new law that we've just received now gives a unique a unique exception for U.S. citizens who graduate from North Carolina public high schools. And I really feel like that this is the one that allows you as a college to buy some time, basically 1 year, to work with that student and help them get that final decision, which you guys know locally is that they're an in-state resident. It gives you basically a year then to work with RDS, work with the student, and mitigate and remedy whatever problems are getting in the way of them to have that residency decision as an in-state student. So the exception, the law is there in the link in your slide. It's also already in the campus responsibility manual. Thank you, Jean. And then you can see the student type there on your screen. So this one is for U.S. citizens. And you need to know that there's already, and has been for a very long time, an exception for non-U.S. citizens. And that's also in the campus responsibility manual on page 19. Those student types that you use locally are very close. So you can see here on your screen on slide number 11 The PHSG student type are for your immigrants, and then the student type for U.S. citizens is PHSC, and you can see that on slide number 10. The only way, and I think the question in the chat box, the only way you're going to know that the person is a U.S. citizen or an immigrant is to ask, right? And so if they're an immigrant, then you're going to need some documentation. Of course, that is for historically, the public high school graduate is not for undocumented immigrants. It is only for documented immigrants. So I want to make sure that that's very clear. And then the one for U.S. citizens, I think that you might need some sort of documentation. I'm looking here at Jean to document that they are a U.S. citizen. You also will need a transcript to show that they did their full final year in a North Carolina high school, and they graduated from that school. So I think I answered the question that we had previously, but we'll pause here to see if there's any other questions, and feel free to put it in the chat box or to unmute your microphone. And while we're pausing, Jean, do you have any clarifying comments that that may be something I missed?
No, I think I was asked the question too about, does the campus have to collect documentation of citizenship? I think that's ultimately going to be your call because it's a system office exception. But to me, I would look for, is there any evidence, to the contrary? But for example, I think it's reasonable if the student has a FAFSA, that's one of the questions. Are they claiming to be a U.S. citizen, and take that at face value?
Yeah.
If there's any reason to question it, that's certainly, I think, incumbent on you to look at that then. But if there's something you could see without saying, I want to see your birth certificate, because that's something like we would never get into.
Right.
We have ways to do that electronically. And so for students who have a FAFSA, that's one of the questions. So that might be an easy way to do that. Other than that, if they're self-reporting on everything, you may want to consider taking that at face value unless there's evidence to the contrary. I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%, Gene, and thank you for bringing that up. I think just for consistency of practice, we automatically accept their self-report on their college application and their FAFSA that one, they're a U.S. citizen, right? And two, that their permanent address is in North Carolina. So I think that answers, Elizabeth, your proof of NC resident is, you've got their permanent address on their application and on their FAFSA if they do a FAFSA. You've got their attestation that they're a U.S. citizen on those documents. I think that's sufficient unless you get into, just like you would do now, if you start seeing other things and go, wait, this person might not be a U.S. citizen, they might be DACA or undocumented, or they may have a visa, then you would reach out to them and say, hey, we need some documentation, right? So I think you would do the same type of scenario that you currently do. We don't want to be burdensome with any more documents for you to collect. We want to keep this as simple as possible. And I think Gene and I are both on the same sheet of music there. I think there is an exception code for the high school graduate. I don't recall what that is, Tracy or Gene.
I think it's there in the chat box.
Let's see.
And one of the questions is, will RDS always provide? For any of those exception codes, they're basically flags to let you know the student has indicated something. Same thing with like veterans exception or something. I've had calls saying, well, RDS didn't flag it, but they're a veteran. If they don't tell RDS doesn't know to pass on that information. So it's going to pass on something like this. If the student goes for the interview and it doesn't look like they're going to pass, it's going to ask them about high school graduation. If they skip that question or don't answer it, there's no way for RDS to know. So if the student answers, it's going to send on that flag for a possible exception, and they're not otherwise passing. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Gene. So basically, if it looks like the student's going to be out of state and they tell you they're a North Carolina high school graduate, then you'll be able to provide the code. If they don't give you that information, of course you won't know. And so I think it's a good first step, guys, when you see that exception code. However, you could have some other people that return as out of state that would be eligible for this exception, but that you did not receive the exception code from RDS. Okay, we'll pause there to see if there's any other questions, either in the chat or if you would like to unmute. All right, this has been a great dialogue, everybody. I really appreciate it. I know I thought this was going to be a shorter meeting today, but we've had some good conversations and I hope they've been helpful. I have one last bullet there on my slide, and that is to remind you that students who are a part of the youth apprenticeship program, and while they're still in high school, there is not a need for the RDS determination. They're kind of like a CCP student, right? So they're in high school, they have not graduated yet, they're part of the youth apprenticeship program. You don't have to send them through the RDS for a determination. However, when they graduate high school, even though they may still be considered a part of the youth apprenticeship program as a high school graduate, I think they have 180 days after high school graduation. But see, the problem is at that point, as a high school graduate, they may start taking courses outside of the youth apprenticeship program. And in order for your institution to know how to appropriately bill them for those courses, you'll need an RDS determination. So when they graduate high school, even though they're a part of the youth apprenticeship program, you'll still have to get them to do the RDS determination. I think this is already a current process and it's not anything new. However, we have received some questions about it recently, and we wanted to make sure that everybody had kind of a brief reminder. Do have a question here in the chat. When should we begin using these student types? The public high school graduates ones, I think, is the ones you're referring to. They're available now. You will need to follow the guide in ServiceNow about how to appropriately set up those student types. There's some, you'll need to work closely with your business office, and also you'll want to make sure you work with the other student services personnel that might be impacted by those student types. One group that can get left out easily is financial aid and veterans, so always make sure you talk to all your cross-functional teams to make sure everybody is aware when a new student type is being worked on or something is changing. Any other questions before we start coming to a close? Okay, friends, thank you for a great meeting today. As a reminder, our next meeting in December, we'll be ready, hopefully, to talk about visa, the visitor student visas and immigration, and we'll hopefully be able to talk about that next meeting. And also, we hope that we'll be able to talk in more detail about military different scenarios and veteran scenarios, and hopefully we'll get those questions answered for you. It helps us, just as a reminder, to submit these kinds of questions ahead of time as part of the agenda item request form. That way we can kind of research them ahead of time and make them available to you at the upcoming meeting. So Michelle, if you want to help remind us to make sure we're doing this and getting it on the agenda, submitting that question for next month will be very helpful once I send out that agenda item request. Thank you everybody for all your work and for everything you do. Please stay safe, please stay healthy. We'll continue to strive to serve you as you serve your students. Have a great day.